Hello and welcome to Bread of Life, a daily devotional program which each week features a different area pastor. Our speaker for this week is Pastor Andre Riendeau of Bloomfield.
Hello, friends. I'm happy to be with you through radio and the sovereignty of God. This week, I would like to talk with you about a topic that affects all of us, forgiveness. We've all been hurt by someone or something. Now, there's no way I'm going to be able to cover every aspect, but I want to get at the heart this week, and I'm doing that by looking at a parable Jesus told in Matthew chapter 18. And if you have a Bible, open up to it. In verse 21, Peter asks Jesus, how many times should we forgive people? And Jesus basically says, endlessly. And then he tells a story about a guy who owed an unimaginably large debt, way beyond imagination, bazillion dollars, completely unpayable. And after begging for forgiveness, his master, the king, cancels his debt. It's an astounding amount of grace this guy's received. So how does the guy respond? Well, verse 28. Now, when the servant went out after being canceled, his debt being canceled, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me and I'll pay it back." But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay back the debt. What? What's up with this guy? Notice it says that he went out after having this massive debt canceled, and the very first thing he does, he went and found, which is intentional, he found a fellow servant of his and demanded that he pay back what he owed him, 100 silver coins, or a denarii. Now, a denarii was a day's wage. So the guy owes him about 4 months of wages, right? That's a lot, actually. It's a good amount. But it's not unpayable like the 10,000 talents or bags of gold that he had owed. In other words, just to give you an idea of the contrast and the size of the debt, the first guy who owed 10,000 talents, one talent was worth 6,000 denarii. What does that mean? It means that the guy who was forgiven by the king had owed him 60 million denarii, which comes out to 200,000 years of wages. Imagine 200,000 years of wages, unpayable. Then he goes out and demands repayment from someone who owes him 100 denarii, 4 months of wages, 100 days of wages. I mean, think about that. This guy's been forgiven an unreasonable amount, 200,000 years of wages, but won't forgive someone who owes him 100 days of wages. He was shown mercy, but he responds with a demand for justice. He has the guy thrown into the same prison that he should have been thrown into. Wow. This, my friends, is a picture of ingratitude. This man has no concept of how much he's been forgiven. And when we struggle to forgive others, it's often because we have failed to remember or even be aware of just how much we've been forgiven. We get caught up in our own selfishness and we demand what's ours instead of realizing how much mercy we've been shown. It brought to mind that scene in the great Jimmy Stewart movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Do you remember the scene where George and Mary have just gotten married and they're getting into the taxi when all of a sudden there's a run on the bank? And instead of going on their honeymoon, George goes back to the bank and he starts to reassure the townspeople they'll get through the money shortage. And he asks everyone, just take out enough to get by for a week. But this one old guy, remember him? He insists, I want all my money. And George Bailey pleads with him not to panic and only take what he needs. But the guy will not do it. He greedily focuses on his own interest and ignores the interests of others. There's a lack of mercy here, fueled by fear. He's self-focused and demands what's his. But how about us? Don't we demand what's ours? In our relationships with others, how much justice do we require? Can I be merciful or I demand what I believe is mine, regardless of the impact it has on you? Listen, the guy does have a right to demand payment, but in light of the mercy he was shown, you'd think he would give up this right. And we don't either, do we? When people wound us, we demand payment too. In spite of how much we've been forgiven. Wow. But what happens then when we refuse to forgive? We'll talk about that tomorrow.
You've been listening to Pastor Andre Riendeau of Bloomfield, and this has been Bread of Life, a program to encourage you from God's Word.